Supply chain chaos. It is something that we've talked about on AgriTalk and covered extensively at Farm Journal, agweb.com, Pro Farmer, Ag Day, US Farm Report. You get the idea. It is an event, a happening that demands attention and respect from every consumer in the country. I'm AgriTalk host Chip Flory. Welcome to this Farm Journal Farm Country Update. It is aptly named Supply Chain Chaos. We have got a fantastic panel to answer your questions and to add to the conversation these conversations are happening all over the country. We know that, but the conversation may be most intense in agriculture. Moving product around the country and security in the food supply is a major concern. But I think we're going to start with what is undoubtedly a top concern for farmers, and that is not just the rising price of inputs for 2022. That has a supply chain connection, and that it's the confidence that growers have or don't have that they'll be able to get what they want or need for the crop production system in the year ahead. Now, we want you to be part of the conversation. This is very important. You've got questions about what is happening in the supply chain. The only way that we know what that question is if you ask it. So please do. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can submit your question via the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. All right, that's down at the bottom of the screen, or you can just use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. I will be watching both of those. We've got some other people that will be watching those functions as well. Either way will work, and we will get to as many of the questions as we can throughout the discussion. Now, as I introduce the panelists, we're going to get some opening comments. And what these opening comments are designed to do is to get you thinking about the direction that you want this conversation to go, okay? We're gonna start with Jeff Parsi. He is the Senior Vice President, Retail North America for Nutrien Ag Solutions. Jeff, thank you for being part of the panel.
Thank you, Chip. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon and interested to take part in these discussions.
Great. So what are the effects of the supply chain chaos that's really got your attention, Jeff?
Well, I think, if I think about this chaos as you just teed it up, I can tell you that we've been dealing with it really since last fall. We had some indications last fall that there were going to be some things that could very possibly get tight as we were dealing with COVID. And, I don't know if everybody would realize this, but, 70 to 75% of the AIs that make up our crop protection chemicals come from China. And so we knew that there had been slowdowns, lockdowns over there. And so we were preparing in some way, but we really didn't know until March what the full effects were going to be. And I could go on for days. We obviously, a lot of people didn't weigh in to or wouldn't have knowledge around just what an impact that freeze in Texas was. Not just, we got things that multiply stacked on top of each other with it. But as we got through this year and managed through the year pretty well, I think in light of that, we started really getting some firsthand information, in late July, August, going into September, that 22 might be a bigger challenge than 21 was in a lot of respects. And so we're spending a lot of time right now with our agronomists out in the field with our customers. Obviously, harvest is well underway and is really coming along really nicely. But we're out right now building crop plans with our customers, taking into effect what we know today. And look, that changes on a daily basis. But we're out, and I can't emphasize strongly enough how important it is to get out ahead from a crop planning standpoint and sit down and talk about what you're planning on doing, and then how we can alter some things as well, because we've got options as it relates to some of these. But that's what we're doing, and it's taking up every bit of our day, every day. Yesterday we had price changes on glyphosate, for instance, that were pretty substantial, and but it changes every day, it changes every hour. But we have to be flexible in our business, and our growers have to be flexible, and they are flexible on a day-to-day basis. And so we just want to move. We want to take the changes that we know about, and then let's try to mitigate them in some way or some fashion.
Right. Jeff, great start there. There's a lot of things that we're going to want to come back to there, because so much of what you talked about there is obviously going to have a big impact on what producers do with cover crops, what producers do with their cropping system in 2022. So we've got a lot of ground to cover with you today. Sam Taylor is a farm inputs analyst for Rabo Research, Food and Agribusiness. Sam is out of the New York office. Sam, thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here with everyone, Chip. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, kind of a sketchy situation that Jeff just outlined for us. I mean, what are the supply chain chaos effects that have really got your attention?
I think it's the sheer number of factors that are compounding. There are a sequence of events, and I think if you take a broader view on the supply chain, so beyond just the logistics side, it is the weather, it is the geopolitics. There's a lot of these exogenous factors which are very hard to plan for as well. And I think the other thing that is really of concern and probably bears consideration is the stickability of a lot of these situations. You basically need more than one of these issues to resolve itself to get back into a semblance of normality. And so I think that we're going to see issues on the supply chain, on the availability and supply-driven inflation for these products for a decent period of time. And it wouldn't surprise me if in a year's time, we're still talking about freight issues out of China in particular, or we're talking about logistics issues domestically. So I think that there's a lot to cover in a very short period of time with this. I think.
Yeah, I want to stick with you for just a moment because, and Jeff made this point too, but I want you to emphasize this for us as we get this started. We're not just talking about a U.S. issue. This is a global problem that we're dealing with, right?
Yeah, and it's global in context, but there is nuances as to what is being seen in with more impression on different geographies as well. So I wrote a paper recently, and I feel like betting on input pricing is basically betting on the benevolence of Xi Jinping, the benevolence of Vladimir Putin, and the weather. And I think that these are things which you can't necessarily legislate for. And we all have, from a regional perspective, talking to you with a European accent, we're facing different issues in Europe that growers in the North America market are necessarily facing. And as we switch and rotate seasons from northern to southern hemisphere, they're going to start to see other issues themselves. Yeah. So we're going to see these issues continue for the foreseeable future, for sure.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Next up, let's hear from Alan Gray. Alan joined the Agricultural Economics faculty at Purdue University in August of 1998. That is where he currently holds the position of Land O'Lakes Chair in Food and Agribusiness. Alan also serves as the Executive Director of the Center for Food and Agricultural Business there at Purdue University. Same question, Alan. First off, welcome. But the same question, what are the effects of the supply chain chaos that's got your attention?
Yeah, Chip, thanks for inviting me today. It's an honor to be here and a chance to visit amongst this panel of folks. Yeah, I don't want to repeat the things that other folks said. I do think it's important to recognize that this is a confluence of factors that created this situation. It's not one single thing. I think some people and the media sometimes tries to simplify this down to one or two things. And the reality is it's a very, very complicated set of factors from geopolitics to weather conditions to structural issues, right? Even so much so as that we just don't have enough truck drivers. And that's ultimately what's boiling down to a big, big part of this problem. I think there's a couple of things that really strike me about it. One is we're really sure, I had not really understood well until this summer how short we are on active ingredient and the difficulties of getting active ingredient into these plants to produce things like crop protection chemicals. And that's really something that I think is a leading indicator, not for the year coming up, but for the year after that even. that these chains take a long time to reset, and we're going to have to be prepared for this for a period of time to come. The second thing I would tell you that I think is on my mind a bit here is that in my judgment, the producer by and large did not face COVID when COVID happened, not the structural shifts. If we're in fresh fruits and vegetables, of course you did. Your demand centers blew up on you and you had to deal with that part of the demand side of that. But by and large, particularly in broadacre, I mean, we were in the middle of crop production already in March and everything had already passed, so we didn't face it. And I will tell you, I don't think we faced it this last year either, because a fair amount of people from Jeff Tarsi's group to the people who supplied Nutrient Ag Solutions, they all had inventories that allowed them to sort of adjust the system accordingly. And what's happening is that now there's no adjustment left in the system. The inventories are gone. And so that's why you see this, I mean, sort of the COVID thing that started this is now hitting the farmer, but it took 2 years for it to get here. And that's what happens with these supply chains and how long it takes to get there. So then the third thing is, I think it's interesting to think about the farmers' options that are available to them. Jeff mentioned this, and I think it's really important to keep in mind. This is not a dire situation where they're not going to get anything done or not going to be able to produce food. We're going to do it differently. We're going to choose active ingredients we haven't used before. We're going to do different kinds of production activities that we haven't done before or haven't thought about before. And from the farmer perspective, it might be good for them to think about that. From a Jeff Tarsi Nutrient Ag Solutions, I'd argue, Jeff, for you, it might be a good deal. Y'all have really opportunities to interact with your farmers, to think about solutions that maybe you haven't thought about before. What I worry about in the agribusiness side with some of my clients is that, boy, once these customers try something different, I sure as heck hope that it doesn't work as good as the product I currently have them buying. Because if they find out another product is better, right, I could end up in some trouble here, right? Anytime you're trying to manage your inventory system and you're worried about stock outs, which is what we're worried about in the agribusiness side of this, what you worry about is once you lose a customer, can you get them back? Right. And that's why I think within the industry, there's a fair amount of panic, including things like, hoarding, over ordering stock, so that we try to make sure that doesn't happen to us. It's a natural reaction to trying to figure out how to manage that situation. So these are complicated issues, but these are the kind of things that are on top of my mind.
Man, you laid out an awesome list of things that we can discuss. Talking about the supplies, that, believe it or not, I think about a 177 national average corn yield that we got from USDA just yesterday, when you mentioned that we had those inventories underneath the market that provided some cushion for us. Well, everybody in the dry areas, Alan, this last year is saying, wow, this corn crop did a lot better than what I thought it would. This bean crop did better than I thought it would. And it's because we had some soil moisture deep down in the reserves. Well, that's what we lived on in crop production for the last year. It's great comparison. Great comparison.
Yep.
Yeah. Long list of things that we can talk about there. All right. Thank you so much, Alan. Let's, and please stand by while we welcome in I'll say it, a fellow Cyclone and Eastern Iowa farm kid, Seth Meyer. Seth is the chief economist at USDA, where he also served as the chief of the World Ag Outlook Board. But before that, well, and after that too, he was a faculty member at the University of Missouri and on the FAPRI team. Seth, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you. The difficulty is here is going last. Everybody's brought out these great ideas. So let me see what I can just fill in and add some to this. So at USDA, you're absolutely right. We're in the center of this when it comes to ag. So we're having all kinds of meetings about supply chains, meat and poultry processing, going all the way back to April of 2020, where you got labor shortages, to now saying, hey, well, what can be done in supply chains, meeting with constituencies, trying to identify short, medium, long-term things that you can do, that government can do. Me as an economist saying, hey, let's make sure we don't improve the flow of one good and then have difficulty getting truck parts from overseas, right? Mm-hmm. So you're trying to balance all of these things in a very tight supply chain. Having lots of meetings and discussions about this. I will add one more thing. If we're going to talk a lot about input prices, I literally sat down with Secretary Vilsack yesterday. We walked through a corn and soybean budget for 2022, talking about input and output prices and the margin squeeze we might see on producers here. So again, we're trying to deal with the immediacy of some of these problems and what actions government might potentially take, and then add to that kind of forward looking, where's the potential danger points as we go forward.
Right. Very good, Seth. Very good. We are starting to get a couple of questions in, and I am going to jump on those first. But I think that there's one concept in all of this that needs to be explained. And hey, any one of you can jump in and explain it, or I'll pick somebody and we'll get it. But I think we need to explain the bullwhip effect in economics. Who wants to do that? Alan, I'm going to lean on you.
Let me unmute myself there, sure, so I can try to help explain this the best way that I can. Chip, I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a supply chain expert, but essentially the bullwhip effect is ultimately it's driven by communication channels, right? And the ability for each one of the individual pieces of a vertical chain that's not vertically integrated to be able to communicate effectively with each other. The expected and actual demands, and then having the supplies that meet those demands. And what happens is those communication channels have delays in them that send improper signals. And when that supply chain gets out of balance from a demand and supply perspective, you have to continually recommunicate the needs at the supply and demand at each one of the levels until you get back to normal. A simple way to think about this: go to a hotel, Chip Flory, and take a shower. The first thing that happens is the water's too hot because you can't figure out where you're supposed to turn it to. And then you turn it and then it's too cold. And then you turn it again and it's still a little bit too hot. And then you turn it again and it's a little bit too cold until you get it to that spot where you're trying to be. That sort of bullwhip effect is what happens. And the pieces of the puzzle that are out on the end are the ones that get whipped the most back and forth on both the raw ingredient supply side and on the demand side of that whip. Those are the two places where that has the biggest impact on you. And I like to think of it like that shower thing, because I struggle with that every time I'm traveling, trying to figure out where the right temperature is in the shower.
Talk about what you know, right?
That's
yeah,
right.
That's right. Jeff, sure sounds like what we're dealing with out there.
Yeah, it is. And look, we don't, as in the seat that I sit in, I try to learn from past experiences and try to keep notes and go back. And I can promise you this year has got me digging back, but it's not out of my memory, 08, 09. And some of the things that occurred there. And I know as a retailer, some of the lessons we learned from that part of it too. And Alan, it kind of goes to your side of it as well. A lot of times when you're having problem procuring product, what you do is just keep ordering and hope it hits somewhere. And this thing will have a flip side to it somewhere. That's guaranteed on it. And so what we try to do, and then this is why this is so important, that you have relationships with your customers, is that you're out right now sitting and talking about how do we attack this? How do we approach it from a cropping? So if I look at it today, I got customers telling me, well, I might just plant all soybeans next year. And if you do that, then the price of corn is going to go to $10.
Yeah.
Because again, that's some more of that bullwhip, Alan, on it. That's not going to happen, in my opinion, on it. But what we want to make sure is that people aren't out there preparing. Well, I might go all soybeans and I might go all corn, so I'll order all of that. And because that's how you get yourself in a really bad situation on it. So what we try to do is we try to go out and sit down on a one-on-one basis with our customers. Let's look at it. Look, every farm is different. Now, it's good to use numbers as an average, but every farm is different. I know the guys I grew up with down in Mississippi, I can categorize them in 4 or 5 different categories on how they input spend and those types of things. So you can't just do it on a blanket approach, but we sit down on a farm by farm basis, look at our historical yields. I'm going to tell you this: in 2022, one thing that's not going to change is yield is going to be key. When you get into these high prices and you're having to spend more to produce a crop, you can't alleviate or give up yield,
Right.
in my opinion on that. And if we look at what happened in 21 was a pretty good year, from a standpoint of we got the acres planted we wanted to plant versus 20, which we had a lot of failed acres, but we planted what we wanted to plant. We got it planted in a pretty reasonable period of time, and growers really put the inputs to their crop. And so when I look up and see those areas that we thought were going to be weaker on some yields and stuff, I think a lot of the things that surprised them to the high side is they used the best genetics. They gave the MP and K, they gave the crop what it needed. They protected the crop in season. And I don't see that changing. And it's easy to say, well, I'm going to cut back on this and cut back on that. But what are you giving up if you cut back on? And what does it make sense from an economic standpoint? And so one of the things that we've done that is different is that as soon as this crop, you got to about June or July, we started taking any product that a supplier was willing to ship us. And so we started trying to build inventory. Now, that might come back to haunt me somewhere down the road, but as short as we thought some of this stuff was going to be, we went ahead and started taking, he said, look, you run your plants, we'll take that product in and get it put in place, as best we can. But look, we're still, look, there are definitely chemistries that we use that are some of the most widely used chemistries that we're not going to have enough product on for next year. But as Alan said, and it was mentioned several times, we have alternatives. We know what those alternatives are, and I'm comfortable with those alternatives.
Okay.
Just want to do things a little bit different than what we've done in the past.
As long as you brought that up, Jeff, let's go ahead and get one of these questions answered here. What other active ingredients are you considering might be some good solutions for growers? Some solutions.
Well, so if we know that, if we know glyphosate is going to be tight going into 22, we're looking at some alternatives. So how do you use, so for the glyphosate you have, where is it most important for its use? Is it a burn down or is it in the over the top market? And look, if it's more important from the over the top market on it, then maybe we take a product like Paraquat, or maybe we go in and plan more pre-emergence products, which we already see that happen. We're going to use a lot of pre-emergence products on acres that we didn't use last year. We're going to do a lot more fall pre-emergence work, and we're doing it right now in these areas. We're getting some decent fall weather in some areas, and so those are the type things that we can do as it relates to that. And we got some old post chemistry that still works just fine. It was just that other products came along that it made it a little bit easier to use, but we haven't forgotten how to use those products.
Right.
And we'll be right. That's how we'll line ourselves up.
Yeah. Harlan made an interesting comment here. He said, let's try to focus on what is good in a challenging situation. Growers will be forced to use a mix of modes of actions on the herbicides. This is good resistance management. That's a good point there, Harlan. Interesting thought. Seth, I want to go to you because the October Consumer Price Index up 6.2%. That was announced just this morning. Analysts at Wells Fargo called it the Consumer Pain Index. The inflation that we're seeing in the country, how much, if any of it, I shouldn't assume, how much, if any of it, is being driven by the product scarcity resulting from this supply chain chaos? You're on mute, Seth.
Sorry, even after all the instruction, I still do that. So, we talked a lot about this morning, and I think, we were talking, you all were talking about the bullwhip effect on demand. Yeah. I think for some agricultural commodities, we've seen real demand. And on the meat side, we talk about the protein prices and seeing a lot of growth in the protein prices month over month, year over year. I don't want to leave out the fact that demand has been very strong, both domestically and abroad, for meat products. And so part of this is it supply chain? Yeah, there are supply chain issues. You look at the weights of cattle that are sitting out there and going into slaughter. Say, why aren't they a little bit more current? Is there a trouble getting those animals worked through the system? Certainly less than last year when we had them backing up. But I think when you look at some of those inflationary pressures, you've got a combination of those effects of of supply chain disruptions, but we have had a lot of demand. Folks, in some ways, you kind of poke through the data and you say, hey, folks aren't spending money on a movie. They're still
Right.
not back to doing that. What they are spending it on is food at the grocery store as well, too. So we see some of this. Now, when you go on to some other things like snacks, something that's a little bit more processing supply chain, you can see some inflation there now as well, too. But I'd lay it at the foot of both of those things saying, hey, we're really enjoying that pork and beef and chickens and eggs that we're getting here in the United States, and we're spending a little bit more on it.
Yeah. Yeah, Seth, my wife likes to watch the Today Show in the morning before she leaves for work. And it was left on a little bit while I was getting ready for today. And they did a feature that they called Meatflation.
Oh.
Okay. Earlier in the week, it was skimpflation. In other words, putting less in the box, but changing the same price. There are all of these issues out there. Mainstream media is getting saturated with this by now, don't you think?
No, I do. And I think it's like we're talking about, like I was telling you about the secretary and I working about through that corn budget. And you say every line, you've got this confluence of forces, energy into fertilizer, labor, and they're all pointing the same direction. I think you're seeing that same thing when it comes to food price inflation now. And then you add on top of that strong demand, you've got issues of, hey, maybe packaging, tin cans, aluminum cans, all that stuff that's going into this, that's adding to it, and labor to deliver it and process it. And then on top of that, we just seem to want more and more and more of these products. I think we really demand is quite strong and adding to that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a
In fact-
popcorn grower from Indiana on the Farmer Forum on AgriTalk today, and he talked about demand for his product is still very good, even though people aren't going to the movies. Demand for his product is very good because they're eating more of it at home. Alan, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
Seth's got a really good point about demand, and it's broad. It's not food. It's not just food. It's everything. I mean, one of the reasons we have the big backlog we have with respect to getting active ingredient into the country is because the ports in Los Angeles and in California are backed up. They're backed up because of demand. I mean, that's demand from products from overseas coming in that have created those bottlenecks, and to the point where now we got containers stacked, and they just passed temporary law to allow them to stack containers higher because we've got so many containers coming in that we've backlogged the ones trying to go back out. We can't get them. Get them out of the way to put the new ones in. Those don't all have ag ingredients in it or active ingredients for ag inputs in them. They have a lot of consumer goods that people are buying that they're wanting to bring into the country, and it's created a bottleneck that agriculture gets caught up in that side of it. So it is part of that bullwhip effect is in fact a demand driven activity that creates part of this bottleneck problem.
Absolutely. Great ad
Chip.
right there. Sam, I want to go to you on this one. And I know that you've that Rabobank has been gathering some information on just how input prices are going to increase or have increased for the 2022 season. Eventually, Jeff said it right now, growers are still in a buy mode. If they can get their hands on it, they're going to buy it. But at some point, there's got to be some price resistance, isn't there?
Yeah, and so just to talk about how we see it, obviously we work for I work for a bank. We have an investment bank side, and we have a rural franchise, so we get to see both sides of the coin. We get to see what the farmers are doing. We also get to see what the corporates are doing. And I think if I reverse to this time last year, we were really concerned about grower purchases. When are they going to make these acquisitions? Is it going to shift towards Q1 versus Q4? And I think that this is completely flipped on its head. Growers are being really aggressive in trying to get their stuff. They're asking for more money. They're using the prepays. They're using the vendor financing solutions because they really do want a lot of this product. But invariably, as the cliche goes, what goes up will come down, like kind of high prices kill high prices, low prices kill low prices. And I think that we are invariably going to see this, but the timing of it is going to be very interesting. But we also need to understand some of the machinations about what is causing this. And I think this is where you need to break down the granularity. For the active ingredients, this is a supply chain issue. This is a an industrial production side issue. I did see one of your questions, your comments. Can we create a domestic production process for some of these active ingredients? Just to address that slightly as well, you know, like kind of as Jeff said, 70-75% of active ingredients do come from China. Drill down into the data, somewhere like 90% of the intermediates which go into the production of active ingredients are actually sourced from China. So you actually embed that supply chain even more into China when you go down into the detail. You like to have the active ingredient production systems closer towards the intermediate production systems, formulation possibly closer to the market. So actually like domiciling a lot of these supply chains is really difficult without an industrial ecosystem. That doesn't come quickly. That's a short period. That's a long period of time. And then I think if you look at the geopolitics that's going into the fertilizer pricing, you know, it is weather. It is, will they turn the gas on into Europe? When will the Chinese re-enter the urea and the global phosphate markets? These seem to be predicated in a second half of the year kind of dynamic. So will prices come down in time for the 2022 season? I think you've got to be see that as relatively unlikely. I would say if there's one thing that might come down, potentially potash, given the fact that a huge amount of this is driven by sentiment, driven by the concerns about Belarusian production, how much of that is getting onto the global market versus staying in Belarus. If you look at BPC, it's such an important part of Belarusian GDP. You've got to assume that Lukashenko is going to be pushing that out somewhere, whether it's cleaning itself through Russia or whether it's somewhere else. But we're probably going to see prices maintain themselves quite high through the input demand seasons in the northern hemisphere market. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see whether in certain geographies, potentially in Europe more than North America, we start to see supply constraints impact yield into the 2022 season.
Chip, you
About that, we're about halfway through. And this is the point that I wanted to be at, because I feel like we've explained the situation and how we've gotten here. There's one more question that I got to ask to help explain exactly how we ended up here. And a lot of the questions that are starting to come in are about the solutions. How do we get out of this problem? And what does it look like when we start to move away and things start to loosen up? But Seth, I'm going to ask you this. And this is I think this is an important question to ask, just to make sure that everybody understands how we got to where we're at right now. Why does the congestion seem to be worse in the LA and Long Beach ports? Why is it worse in California than anywhere else?
Well, I think we've got some of the biggest container shipment ports in the country going there. There's a huge amount of volume that flows through there. And you know, we talk about incredible demand. So we've got all these products coming in. It means more containers trying to make their way through the system. We have problems with carriages and trucks. And, you know, do we have trucks to come pick that container up off of the dock and take it inland or take it where it needs to be? And all of a sudden, it's like you find yourself in the system where you have a hiccup, you got containers everywhere. All of a sudden, it's just simply difficult to get in and out of there with the containers, and you start to slow that whole system down. And so when I think, you know, when we have problems in California, because we're doing a lot of container shipments through there. So what you see is you have ag folks moving to other ports, trying to find other ways into the system, maybe bypassing that. You know, I think that, you know, I think a short-term solution that kind of moves those empties off of the dock is a good thing. As an ag guy, I don't want that to be the permanent solution, right? I want us to free up that system. And if that means get those empties out now and free up that system and get it working again, so we can get those empties back to the interior and we can export those products back out of that port as well too. So as an ag guy, hey, what do we need to do to get the system working? And then let's make sure we get it back to a place where ag can take advantage of it.
Okay, Sam, some of the rules, regulations that are in place in California, if we would loosen those up on the truck drivers and so on, might that help?
Oh, it's a bit harsh to pick the foreigner to talk about political politics at this point.
Come on, man.
This is. I think the short answer is potentially yes. But I do think that, I mean, if you look at the longer term trend, they're talking about a deficit of what, 150,000 truck drivers by the end of this decade. It is a structural issue. You have to look at what are the incentives to get people into it. It's a longer term issue than a short term issue, but certainly it's permeating its way through and it's impacting the broader supply chains as well.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to talk some more about the solutions here going forward. Jeff, this one is from Anonymous, and I don't know if you've spotted it in the Q&As or not, but here it is. Sure, commodity prices are surging, but so are input prices, as we've been discussing, but at disproportionate ratio. How are retailers going to pivot to serve growers to help them figure out how to be profitable? I would add in there, is that your responsibility? But that's just me. And are you utilizing data in any way to help you figure that out?
Well, I certainly think we think it's our responsibility.
Okay.
I mean, we're servicing our customers. Look, ROI is on top of mind when we sit with these customers. And, you know, I always had a pretty simple business philosophy. If our customers do well, we do well. They don't do well, we're not going to do well. And maybe that's too simple to think about it, but it's always worked from that standpoint. So I do think we take that as a part of our responsibility with the relationship that we have with the customer. I think the other thing is that, look, over the last 5 years, we've had a ton of technology come into this industry. And, you know, when I think about the truck driver situation now, look, the hardest employee for me to hire in my business today is a truck driver or an applicator driver, okay? And so when I sit there today and I look at the advancements being made on autonomous vehicles, I mean, I see a bright future for that coming down the road, and we're tied into that as we can. But there's so much technology that we have today in our business. You know, and I look at our digital platform that we built to serve our customer, we're going to have to be open to using a lot of this technology. And this is actually, I think, going to push this technology much faster than anybody even envisioned on it. You know, we own a large soil testing lab here in Memphis, where I'm at, Waypoint Analytical, and we see a surge in soil testing going on right now. We're out in many areas doing that testing ourselves. So let's find out specifically, first of all, let's identify what crop we're going to plant, okay? Yep. And again, I don't see a lot of shifts. If I get into that Corn Belt region, I don't see a lot of shifts there. People that plant corn are going to plant corn. We might see some shifts in it. It's when you get to the southern half of the United States and you got options of planting cotton, corn, soybeans, sorghum, rice, peanuts. That's where we'll get, you know, where I think we'll see the shifts in it. But let's identify what crop we're going to plant. Let's look at what this past year's crop pulled off. What's necessary to hit those yield volumes that we want to hit. And then again, what can we do? What can we alternate in there? We're using a lot of Infera type products today from a fertility standpoint that brings some economics into the picture as well. We can spoon feed products today like we haven't done in the past before from a fertility standpoint, and we can do
biostimulants, Jeff.
Huh?
Biostimulants. There was a question. Are you seeing more demand for biostimulants?
Yeah. Any of those type products, and we're working with all of them. But what you want to make sure of is what you're paying for today or what you're purchasing is at a higher cost. Okay. How do we make sure that plant has access to every bit of that, and we're getting every nickel out of what we're spending, making it available? If it's a nutrient, making sure it's available to the crop. And look, that's doing a lot from an environmental standpoint as well. No retailer out there wants to sell more than what's needed to produce a crop from that standpoint. So we're really pushing technology right now. We're pushing the digital platform, and how do we go out and, you know, seed selector tools, things like that, stuff that's advising us of when disease is prone to develop in these crops. And so it's a big push. Look, everybody's made a huge investment in this technology, and now, and it's been slow, in my opinion, a little bit to be adapted to, but I see it really speeding up fast today out of necessity.
Yeah, the rest of the country, when it comes to technology in communications and so on, we pulled the future forward with COVID. And I would agree, maybe on production agriculture, we slowed it down a little bit, but when we start to feel the impact, it's going to come in a rush. And guys are going to have to get up to speed on this. I got to stay with Jeff. One more question on from the listeners. Will the supply chain affect the availability of fertilizers, granular versus liquid this spring?
You know, I think the biggest question we have, you know, if you look at this supply chain piece of it, I think the greatest tightness across the board is probably in the crop chemistry piece of it. You know, just that's as I see it today. And again, going back to the active ingredients, and I saw somebody ask a question about putting more, you know, will we start producing more actives in maybe in North America? A lot of that's from a regulatory approval standpoint. It's very difficult to get some of this stuff approved. And secondly, it's the workforce. We don't have workforce out there today to do a lot of that piece of it. But I see the crop chemistry piece of it on the fertilizer side of it. Maybe some of the liquid UAN type products with some of the stuff that's being combated from a regulatory standpoint today might be the biggest pinch points, and those might be both on the both east and west coast where you have more imports coming into the market. And the one bright spot is that, look, the biggest decision that a producer makes every year, and probably most important along with his agronomist, is seed. And seed actually looks in good shape. We're not anticipating supply chain issues there, and the pricing on it was much more modest going from 21 into 22. Now, if everybody decides they're going to plant corn or soybeans, I'll have to eat my words on that. But again, I've said I don't think that'll happen. And if I add one more thing to this, I do think in the back half of 22 we'll see this thing start to level out on it. And I say that because, number one, you know, a lot of this is about energy. If you're in China, some of it's about the Beijing Olympics right now and such. And so we'll see some improvements in that area. I see container prices coming back some.
Okay.
You know, if in other words, off of their highs and such. So I think when we get into a July, August standpoint, we're going to see this thing alleviate itself to some degree.
Oh, okay. July and August is a little late for most of us, but I agree with you. I know, I understand what you're saying on the timing there, Jeff. Sam, I'm going to ask you the same question. Are you concerned about availability of fertilizers this spring?
I'd probably just reiterate a lot of what Jeff just said, and I don't imagine I'm going to be able to offer more insight into this than Jeff in his position. But certainly it is the chemistry that is the keen focus. And when we talk to our growers, the quick question we get is on the liquid 32. So again, yeah, that's it. It's the same thing Jeff said.
Yep. Okay. You guys, there was a question on here. Are high input prices having an impact on farmers' use of animal and green manures? If you've got the manure, you're using it. It doesn't matter what the price of the fertilizer is. Am I right there, guys?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's, you know, it's not, I don't feel like it's 2008 when the pork chop was the byproduct coming out of those finishing units, you know, because they were going up for the manure, and that was basically the reason. We're not there. We're not going to expand in the hog industry because of fertilizer prices at this point. Alan, I don't think that's something that we need to be thinking about as a concern at this point, do we?
No, I think, you know, there's at the margin, you can make that economic decision to decide if you want to use that alternative fertilizer product. But the reality is that that's a limited supply in and of itself as well. And it won't take very long for that price to get out of whack if we had too much demand there. And the logistics of that obviously are quite difficult. The locational advantages are not there. So, you know, what I would tell you is that the fertilizer piece of this has less to do probably with shortages of supply, although there is some of that, right? There's been some weather hiccups. There's been some plant shutdowns that create some of that supply side of that issue. But this is input costs, natural gas prices, drive nitrogen prices. We know that happens. It's always happened. Nitrogen prices are up substantially. Therefore, that combined with corn prices being higher, those two variables are the predictors of nitrogen prices. Why are nitrogen prices high? Not because we're out of supply, but because natural gas is expensive and corn prices are high. That's why.
Okay. Alan, I want to stay on that for just a second with you if I could, because it became popular think for a period of time to say that nitrogen prices were disconnected from natural gas prices, really didn't have that much impact. And what really drove nitrogen prices was what farmers were willing to pay for it. Any truth to that?
I would not be an economist worth my weight if I said, no, it doesn't have anything to do with what somebody's willing to pay for it. Of course it does, right? That's the demand side of that equation. And as corn prices go higher, farmers drive for higher yields. When they drive for higher yields, corn is a nitrogen eater. That's how you get yield. You put nitrogen on it, right? So naturally, that demand side is there to want to do that. Higher corn prices lead to the willingness to pay more for that nitrogen fertilizer to feed that crop. So I mean, that seems to make natural sense to me. The natural gas price not being a part of it is simply that's not true. I mean, it's the major input in that process. It's lagged. It's not perfectly correlated, of course, because there's so many other factors that can go into that activity. But natural gas is the core source for how you get nitrogen. So those to think that somehow the economics are broken, that the main input source doesn't have anything to do with that pricing activity doesn't make good economic sense to me.
Yep. Seth, were you going to jump in on that?
I was just going to say, and then you kind of, you can follow them and they move together. You're right. There's noise in there, but we've had Hurricane Ida with some production shutdown. We've had some trade actions against some, some AD/CVD investigations as well too. We do trade some of that stuff across NP and K. So absolutely, you've got kind of three factors all coming together to provide that. But I think natural gas is the big mover there.
Okay. Seth, I'm going to go to you for a couple here, and they're kind of disconnected. So I'm just going to ask them. There are two questions that I've got for you. One of them's got to do with acres, and I know that you're going to leave this to Lance to figure out in the prospective planners report next March. But do you think the fertilizer prices can or will have much of an impact on how we divvy up acres for 2022?
So I think, so I will say on November 5th, we released our long-term baseline. This is for budgetary purposes, but we step off of the October baseline and we do it for the out year. So it's like your first very initial look at what 2022 crop area is. And sure, fertilizer prices will affect a more nitrogen intensive crop like corn, but at the same time, the prices favor corn to some extent, right? So that's part of the reason they're willing to pay up. So I think, it'll be interesting to see how it sorts itself out. But right now, I guess, maybe Jeff can follow up with me on what he's seeing in acreage, but I think that there's still that margin benefit for corn. They want to plant it.
Yeah, I would agree. And that kind of goes with the statements that I made, by depicting the certain geographies and where you're more apt to see those changes. The other thing about it is, look, these producers have worked hard to build these rotations that they built with these crops, and these rotations work. We know that, Alan. We can look at it from an economic standpoint, and a lot of them are just not going to get that hard. Their operations are built around those rotations and those crops. And if I look up in Canada, for instance, and I know it's mainly U.S. market here, but if I look at what it looks like for canola acres next year, it's extremely high going into 22. And look, we're doing a lot of fall work right now in both. We're finishing up in Canada and right in the middle of it in the U.S. right now, and there's a lot of activity out there, because a big part of this cropping system as well is getting a head start on, especially when you look at supply chain constraints. If we don't have any kind of fall this year, then that's going to create an absolute mess in the spring. Luckily,
Jeff,
we are, we're getting some fall. We had a crop that started out early from a harvest standpoint, and so these growers know the importance of getting a head start on that crop. And
Jeff, the reason I'm laughing is because I think I hear the end of fall field work happening right now with heavy rain falling outside my door. So
Yeah, I was hoping we could get around that one a little bit this
Yeah.
week, and maybe it won't be so bad, especially on the eastern side. But
Right.
it's we know we got a weather maker out there.
Yeah, that's right.
So our
Yeah.
first take was 92 million acres corn, 87.5 million acre beans. Again, just looking at this in a very general sense, they're from stepping off the October WASDE and putting those tables out there. They're all available for you. But you'll continue to see that change. We'll go to the Ag Outlook Forum. We'll be a little bit further in with the economics, and we'll go from there.
Okay, very good. Seth, I'm going to stay with you. And like I said, there's really no good segue over to this, so I'm just going to jump into it. The White House has announced what have been labeled some creative solutions to relax those choke points out there. Some of what they're looking at are things that I think would be funded under the physical infrastructure bill that's passed Congress, needs to be signed into law by the president, things like dredging. Those are long range issues, but is it something that we need to accelerate now because it will have immediate benefits?
That's always the trick in government, right? Moving at a pace where you're solving the short-term problem, laying some things in medium and long-term as well that might contribute to this process. So, you're talking about, that's why I brought up this issue of let's not put in place some type of action from a US government standpoint with CCC funds available that frees up this aspect of agriculture and makes it hard to get tractor parts. Right. So I guess as an economist, my first thought is what can we do to increase the throughput of the system in the short run? Because if you put your finger on one part of it, you're just going to make the problem worse someplace else. So I think it's important for us to try and attack this. And that's why I'm saying, hey, if we've got container empties bottled up in the West Coast, that's not a good thing for anybody in ag. And while we clear those out, we don't like them to see them go back to Asia empty. Maybe that's the way we free this up in the short run and get it moving again better in the long run. So as an ag guy, I'm always there saying, hey, yeah, but let's make sure that this is a solution that works for ag. I think on the other part of that, we talked about this structural issues with truck drivers. Absolutely. So I think as USDA looks for some of its funds, so we've got funds sitting there that we've announced under CCC. CCC has very specific rules, right? This has to be very specifically applied, but are things that we can do for animal hauling? Are there things that we can, train people not to haul not just truck drivers, but truck drivers who know how to handle livestock? Can we do other things which are not immediate effect, but may help improve the situation in the long run? So we have lots of those kind of conversations as well too. But I don't think we want to discount the possibility. Are there things that we're working on saying, are there things we can do in the short run? But let's handle some of these longer structural issues as well that don't get us right back in this position if we have another event.
Yeah. Okay.
So Chip, just to weigh in on that a little bit. I mean, it's not fun when we're in these situations and they take some time to work through, but the markets are trying to work this out. I mean, the market very clearly says, ship empty containers back to China. It's absolutely telling you that. They're trying to do that. I mean, it's they're 10x. If I'm a shipper, I have no interest in loading a container in the port in Los Angeles right now.
Right.
It's 10x return just to ship the thing empty back to China and refill it and send it back. Now, I believe that's the market telling you to do that in the short run, Seth. I don't think that's a long-term. There can't be that long-term market difference between those two shipping prices. It just doesn't make sense. I think it's telling you right now your bottleneck is in that system. Get rid of those things and ship them back to China and get them filled back up, and then the system will start to work again. At least that's what it seems to me. And then the only other thing I'll say about it is that I think the administration's trying to do some things to help. And what you hear coming from them is, we're trying, but most of the things we can do can't move the needle very much. They're really hard things to do to make much of a difference.
Yeah, and so I'm with you. I mean, there's a value proposition in going back to China with those things empty maybe and putting a bunch of iPhones in and sending them back, right? So again, if the short-term solution here is to free this stuff up, get those things for Christmas off the docks and get stuff moving again, okay. But I don't think we want to incentivize a system that makes that the permanent situation in the backhaul, right? So you want to get back to a position. we send empties back to, we did pre-pandemic, we sent empties back to Asia. Let's get us back into a position where it's more balanced and we're not sending so many empties back, that we got our ag exporters an opportunity to send those high value products back. Let's get this solved by Chinese New Year so they can hit that market. So I agree with you. You got to free up the system. You got to break some piece of this off.
No, I agree with you, Seth, and I think that's what I thought we heard from our transportation secretary yesterday was very much this. You don't want the government to start managing your containers. You need the market to clear this, and the market has a pricing system right now that says send the empties back. But because if you start messing around with that system, like Jeff said, oh, you'll get a backside to that piece if you start messing around with it, because it's going to just create another mess in that system. And look, this is not an easy thing to have to say, Chip, because sometimes market adjustment periods are not fun. These are difficult. Those are difficult things to have to work through, but the alternative solutions are probably worse.
Right. Yep. Great point, Alan. Great point. Yeah. Sam, I'm going to go to you on this one because there's a little bit of prodding going on out there at the ports on the West Coast. $100 fine if the container is sitting the first day past deadline, $200 on the next, $300 on the next, $400. That adds up in a hurry. That kind of a fine system, is that going to clear some of the problem?
If you don't have the lorry drivers, I don't see really how it can necessarily do it, to be honest. I mean, you can, it's ultimately basically a tax, isn't it? Like kind of, that's what it is. If you don't have the lorry drivers, there's not much you can do. So this is, again, to Seth and Alan's point, this is a structural issue. This is a structural issue which will take time to evolve. You can't train people up. You can't qualify them instantaneously. This will abate. We are obviously going through peak seasonal dynamics. As we look towards supplying stuff for Christmas, there should be some abatement maybe as we get towards the end of December and into next year, where you might see some kind of easing of this. But no, I can't imagine any kind of fines on this is going to really materially impact this at all.
Yeah, the comment was made. There's only so much that you can do to force the issue to clean things up. Okay, guys, you have done a fantastic job of answering many of the questions that were coming up. I've been checking them off just as they've come up in conversation. So great job doing that. There's a couple that I don't think we're going to have time to get to, because I want to end with the same question for the four of you. And that is, if you could prioritize one activity to get us jump started on cleaning up the situation, the chaos that is in the supply chain, what would be the top 2 or 3 items on that list? All right, I'm looking for the one that is going to jump up most quick. Boy, Sam ducked his head out of the screen. Seth took his mute off first.
I took my mute off. You know, I think that the one that you could actually maybe get a handle on, how about that? West Coast ports. Things that you can't get a handle on that would be game changers, labor and truck drivers, maybe in particular, right? So things you can do, maybe free up some of the ports, get the system working. You're going to find the next bottleneck in the system once you do that. You know, you're going to take that one off the top and you're going to find out what the next one is. And the next one's probably truck drivers. And that's a labor issue and it's a training issue. And so I think you'd work your way back down. So short run, ports, longer run, some of these training issues on trucking.
Chip, just for clarity, I wasn't dipping my head down so much as going into a point of contemplation. But
and your mute is off, so go for it, Sam.
Yeah. So my thought would be actually focus less on what you can't control and focus more on what you can control. And I think farming practice is the easiest marginal solution that growers can actually adapt to. And I think that they need to be versatile. They need to adapt. They need to look at the options that are out there. There's a huge amount of options that come to the table. I say we because we are farmers. I mean, I'm the son of a farmer. I would love to be a farmer, but land in Europe's too expensive. So we need to be adaptable, and we need to see some of these opportunities that companies like Nutrien, like Jeff, put forward, and just tinker around the edges to try and manage ourselves through these difficult periods, because they will rebound after a while.
Very good. Very good. Jeff, your mute is off. I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, it's going to kind of echo with what's been said here. If I think about it in my day-to-day world, like I don't need to be figuring out the port in LA because I have no expertise in that area at all. But if I look at what we can do, and crop solutions planning is, and I've said this about 3 times, I can't reemphasize how important it is. Sit down with your agronomist, no matter who he is.
Yeah.
Build your crop plan for next year. We're looking at 2nd tier options and 3rd tier options. We are, if you plan for it, it's not a disaster. Okay. And it doesn't hit you out of left field on that side of it. So let's go in and plan for it, and let's be accurate. And kind of what Alan said, let's make sure that we're not placing orders in 4 different places for the same product, because that's what will make this thing go longer than it naturally should go. So I haven't ever seen a problem that communications didn't mitigate some portion of what that problem was. Communication's absolutely key right now.
Perfect. Perfect. Alan, what's at the top of your priority list?
Well, I hate to be a broken record there. One of the things I would say, Chip Flory, is that you want to listen to Chip Flory and all the folks at Farm Journal as they keep bringing these issues up and talking about them. And I don't say that to pander. I do mean that it's really what Jeff was just saying and everybody else has said. Planning is the most important thing here. If you're thinking about this now, you have options to do something about it. What you don't want to do is sit around and wait till February and you don't have any options available to you. You don't understand what those options are. And understand that the supply chain partners are here to help you work through this, and that they're having the same challenges you are. And that's good news, right? If you're in the same boat together, you know that, hey, we can work out solutions together and feel confident if I'm a farmer about doing that. The other place that I would speak to is from a policy perspective. And really about the only thing you have in the short run from a policy perspective to do, and I see us starting to do this as it relates to the ports and a number of other areas all across in country, is that we're looking at our regulatory environment and saying, are there pressure valves that we can release? Maybe they're temporary pressure valves, but there are places where regulatory is having an impact on our supply chain. And there are opportunities to release some of those pressure valves to try to have some impact on what's happening there. And I'm heartened to see that at least we're looking at those things and saying, hey, maybe this is something that we need to do a little bit differently. But believe it or not, as simple as it is, a few days ago when they said you can now stack up to 4 of the containers high with each other off the ground, it makes a huge difference because they're actually storing them on wheels right now on trailers. And when you're having to store full containers on trailers at the inland ports, guess what? You don't have a trailer available to take an empty one to the port anymore. Yes. I mean, it really is in some ways that practical. Okay, the regulations are don't stack them that high because there's a fire problem. Got it. But how about we just relax that stuff for a little bit here until we fix this problem? And I see us starting to do some of those things and really examine which ones of these things could we fix. And I think that's a priority where we could actually control something, Sam, that, we could control that in some ways to help get this fixed.
Yeah, can control what you can. That's what you're getting to. You guys, I know if we could, there would be a great round of applause for the insights that you have shared with us today. Thank you so much for doing that. Jeff Tarsi, Nutrient Ag Solutions, Sam Taylor, Rabo Research, Alan Gray, Purdue University, and Seth Meyer, Chief Economist at USDA. Thank you so much for being part of the supply chain chaos solutions here. Maybe the most important message that I heard throughout this was that, is it a challenge? Absolutely. Is it a challenge that we can overcome? Yes, and we will overcome it. Our food supply is secure. We're going to have a food supply in 2022. We're going to raise crops. Might we change the way we do it? Absolutely. The supply chain is going to have a major influence on exactly what those changes might be. Thank you all for joining us for this Farm Country Update. We hope that these insights will help you understand the efforts that are taking place to keep the goods on the store shelves and the meat case full. A recording of this conversation will be available tomorrow at farmjournal.com. Stay safe and healthy, and keep watching for messages from Farm Journal for details on our next update coming soon.